My fellow Americans, as President and Commander-in-Chief, it is my duty to the American people to report that renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
With those words, President Lyndon Johnson begins an escalation of American troops and firepower in Vietnam. Over the course of the next decade, approximately 2.7 million American men and women will serve in the Vietnam War, and 58,220 of them will die serving their country. Two individuals who served and returned were Tom Mundell and Jack Jackson. Both were part of helicopter warfare. Commander Mundell as a gunner and Colonel Jackson as a pilot. In this interview with junior ROTC students, they share their experiences in helicopter combat in Vietnam. Most Americans had no idea Vietnam was even a place on the map, but of course as the decade of the 1960s continued and we began the 1970s, Vietnam would be a predominant force in American media coverage and in Americans' lives. Two individuals who joined us today spent time in that war, and I'm happy to introduce them to you now. Let's begin by introducing Colonel Jack Jackson. Colonel Jackson, thanks for being with us.
Pleasure to be here.
We're also being joined by Commander Tom Mundell. Commander Mundell, thanks so much for being with us. What got you involved in being a gunner? Did you always?
I was in flight school. I had joined to actually become an aviator, and it was a crash there, and I had to wait for a recycle, and it was about 6 months to go for a recycle to get back into flight school. And my cousin was already in Vietnam, and he said, "Why don't you come over here and fly with me?" And so that's what I did. I asked the base commander if I could go to Vietnam and come back and go to flight school. He said sure, and they let me go. And that was the beginning of my aviation career, and I learned a lot.
You've got some great video of gunner training, and I think it'd be nice if we could show this gunner training video while you describe to the students what was your training experience like. Did you go through a boot camp? Was it straight to training for the gunner
as a
work?
gunner?
Yeah,
No.
as a gunner.
It was first day in Vietnam. My cousin picked me up at Tan Son Nhut Air Base in a helicopter just about like that right there, and it was just him and I. And he showed me what an M60 machine gun was. And he goes, "I'm going to show you how to shoot this. We'll go out and shoot it a couple times and give you an idea of what it's like to really be in a real aircraft in Vietnam." I said, okay. We were out there 15 minutes and flew beside the Pelican Island. And next thing I knew, we were shot down and I was in the river. And I was lucky enough to get out, and somehow I never let go of my weapon. And my cousin pulled me out, and we got onto shore, and all of a sudden a bunch of black pajamas came running at me. And
let the students know what black pajamas refers
those
to.
were Viet Cong. The North Vietnamese Army had uniforms, and the VC, Viet Cong, had black pajamas that they wore. And they were firing at us. And to be truthfully, perfectly honest, I was scared to death. I didn't know what was going on because it was all of a sudden a lot of noise and things, and I was backing up, and I fell over driftwood. And when I did, I pulled the trigger. And when I did on the M60, it had a long belt of ammunition still attached to it somehow. I don't know why, but it scraped across right where it was supposed to go, and I fell down on the ground. Next thing I know, I've got a general standing in front of me telling me I did some magnificent shooting, and I had 6 kills there, and it was all by accident, but that was my beginning of my career, my very first day in Vietnam, and I wanted to be an aviator, and I wanted to be a gunner.
Was yours on-the-job training as well, or did you do flight school? Or?
I did flight school. I went through the Naval flight training, and the Navy trains Marines, and obviously they're naval aviators. We went through in 11 months. It's now 26 months, to give you an example of the training. I made my first carrier landing aboard the USS Roosevelt on a Sunday. 11 months later, I got my wings. 2 months after that, I went to my tactical squadron. 2 months after that, I was in Vietnam, flying combat missions. So, and I went over as a jet pilot.
But you also flew helicopters as
And
well.
they stuck me in helicopters. I got over, I said, "We really need helicopter pilots. Guys like Tom wanted to be gunners, so we need pilots."
We've got video actually of arming the helicopter, and while we look at this, Jack, give the students some idea. What kinds of weapons did you have available? Rockets, missiles? What were available to you on the helicopter?
On the helicopter, we had M60 machine guns. They shot 7.62 rounds, and we had 2.75-inch rockets, meaning they're about a round as a baseball bat, a little smaller, and about that long. We had 2 rocket pods that way, and then the door gunners had the machine guns. And a little known fact, what's said here stays here all over the world. When one guy was flying, as an example, if Tim and I were, or Tom and I were flying, if he's flying the helicopter, I would shoot out the window, and vice versa. So he'd have an M16, and we would do a lot of shooting. You can see him loading. And we had outposts. We took that helicopter at 6 in the morning or 6 at night, and when you needed ammunition, you would go to this location and you reload, rearm, get fuel, and start all over. You kept it all day, 12-hour days.
Well, we're going to spend a good deal of time letting you all get a sense of what it was like to be in combat during the Vietnam War. And to begin with, we're going to look at some video of the topography of the country so you get a sense of what it is they're looking down into as they're flying over it, and what the enemy positions would be like and how they would be shrouded. So you're dealing with a country that does have a lot of hills, mountainous terrain as well. It's not the same kind of country we were dealing with in World War II. Tank warfare wasn't nearly going to be what it was in World War II. You needed to fly in a lot of ways. There was a great deal of jungle. And obviously you also had to deal with water and marshlands, all of that together. And Tom, how easy was it as you guys are flying above? Are you flying pretty close to the canopy of the trees?
We, in Loaches, we were on top.
And a Loach is what?
That's a low observation attack helicopter. We had miniguns on ours also, plus our free M60s. But we hovered right on top of the triple canopy. That's foliage that has undergrowth, 3 different levels of undergrowth underneath it. And you train yourself to be able to see through that the best that you can, but a lot of times you don't see through it, and a lot of terrible things happen because of that.
And Jack, are you able to see their gun positions? Were you aware that gun positions were there? Was it all based on the fact of where the fire was coming from?
Many times in the triple canopy, you could not actually see the enemy guns. And we would try and draw their fire. And once we drew their fire, we would then take that position on and eliminate it. The issue sometimes was, though, our enemy don't, and God forbid any of you have to go to war, but if you do, I'll be very proud, and you will do this country proud, all of you. But don't ever underestimate the intelligence of your enemy. They were smart, they knew what they were doing, and many times it would be a decoy. It really wouldn't be a gun at all. And there'd be somebody down there just shooting, say, a flare in the air, and as you roll in on it, they would shoot from the sides. And that'd ruin your whole day.
And there were tunnels that
Yes.
they had successfully built. We've got a tunnel entrance.
I didn't realize just how the tunnel network was effective. I had 2 situations. My first one was, for those of you who aren't familiar, a napalm bomb is like a fire bomb. And you may have seen movies of it or pictures of it. And I was dropping a napalm one day, and it was close to our troops, and it happened to just go down one of the openings to the tunnel. And I'm telling you, when that thing exploded down in that tunnel, there was smoke coming for as area the size of your school that came up different places. The second time that I had a really close encounter with a spider hole, as we called them, there was a very severe firefight. The medevac helicopter had landed, and they were getting shot up pretty bad, so I was in a helicopter, and I went down, I hovered in front of them, and I was just shooting, and we're loading the wounded on the other helicopter. And when all of a sudden, about 30 yards in front of me, out of a spider hole, jumped 2 regular NVA, and they had what we would term a 50 caliber machine gun. It shoots a bullet about as long as your dinner knife and about as big around as a hot dog. And I can still to this day see that man pulling that bolt back, to put a round in the chamber, and it jammed. He couldn't get the bolt home, and I often thought if that bolt would have went home, he'd have just blown that helicopter. I was flying to pieces. He couldn't get it home, and I remember shooting, and then there was nothing, and we came out of there. Those are my two memorable experiences with tunnels and that sort of thing.
And as you're describing that story, you talked about evacuating the wounded with helicopters. We've got some video we can bring up, because Tom, as a person who was on those helicopters, as well as Colonel Jackson, talk a little bit about the nature of picking up the wounded, going down to the ground. Were you constantly dealing with enemy fire as you had to land, and what this process was like to pick up the wounded?
Actually, Jack can answer that better than I can, because I was one being picked up normally. I didn't go down and pick anybody else up. They were picking me up.
Yeah, well, when we came in after people like Tom and the severely wounded, normally in a gunship, we would provide cover. But when the combat situation was so severe, what we called slicks, and what a slick is, it's the same helicopter, but it's not armed. And the reason they didn't arm it is if you don't have that ordnance on there, you can get one more wounded person out of there. And when you're talking about bringing out 4 versus 3, and you're that 4th person, so that's why they were slicks, like you're watching now. When it was so bad and the shooting was so bad, we would send the gunships in, and that was my job. We would shoot our way in. We would take out the most severely wounded first. There was a guy who we pulled out. It was a very severe firefight. And as I met him, this is 30 years ago, I met this guy, and he said, "You're Lieutenant Jackson." And I said, "Well, I used to be." And he said, "You saved my life." And I said, "How do you know this?" And he said, "When you landed, they threw me on the helicopter, and I was sitting in this seat, and they threw him on this side. We wore our name tags on our wings up here, above on our flight suits." And he said, as I turned to reach to grab his ammo belt and pull him in, he looked up and saw my name tag. And he said, "You said this to me," and I don't recall it. I slapped an old oily rag. He'd been shot through the side. And I slapped that rag on there and told him to put his arm on that and roll over as we left, or he was going to bleed out. And years later, and I said, "How do you know?" And he picked up his shirt and he goes, "That's where I was shot." And that was the type of things we did with the gunships, to go in and get the guys, or if they were being overrun, traditionally a unit of 12 guys would think they would take on a battalion, which is 800 bad guys, or enemies. They weren't bad guys. And we'd have to go in and get them. And one thing that was interesting, in the triple canopy, they would have the decoys, but when we go somebody like that, we had smoke canisters about the size of a can of pork and beans. And we learned real quick. I told you the enemy was intelligent. We had to say, "Pop a smoke." They were different colors. You have orange, green, yellow, whatever, red. And what you said was, "Pop a smoke." And they would pop it, and then we would tell them the color. That's green. That's us. Because you'd see a yellow one over here and an orange one over here. And if you went over there, that was trouble. Oh, wow. Some of those little small things, when we go in and get guys who've been shot up like this, and the corpsman or the guys on the ground, "Pop a smoke." And they would pull that canister, and I'd say, "Green smoke," or else he'd say no, and then I look over, okay, yellow. It's yellow. That's where we would go. Because if you went the wrong place, that got ugly in a hurry.
So let's take a typical day, so to speak, Tom. You're getting up in the morning, and it's a great breakfast in the tent, and what happens from that point on? If they're not seeing your facial
You must be talking about the Air Force.
No, that's right.
Just kidding.
Give the students an idea. What was it like?
I didn't really get too much breakfast. Should have, but 12, 14-hour days was not unheard of. As a matter of fact, that's usually 7 days a week. And it was getting up, getting the aircraft ready, making sure everything was right, and we would get in it and take off and hopefully bring that same aircraft back. If we didn't, we'd be brought back to get another one.
We've got some video of helicopters on reconnaissance flights. Talk a little bit about the importance of reconnaissance and what it's designed to do that would make a difference for future, success.
Okay, as an example would be that artillery piece that you saw. Actually, you can see it very well, that artillery piece. But before that happened, it was totally covered over. We hovered in, and I actually found 6 artillery pieces, and that was a pretty big find at that time. And it's very difficult to find things underneath there, and once you find them, actually know what you find, because like Jack had mentioned, they put decoys out there and you didn't always know. And he had mentioned something about dropping a napalm down. I remember seeing a big silver thing that was painted, had a bunch of black stuff on it, just one spot kind of sparkled at me, and I said, I'm gonna pop a few rounds off. And I said, okay. And I said, get a little closer, because I couldn't see it. And I went like this, and I didn't realize what it was, but it was a 10,000-gallon tanker in the Eshall Valley. And that sent up a little bit of a fireball. And can you imagine a 10,000-gallon tanker on the highway, somebody hovering 100, 200 feet above it, and you fire an M60 that's got a tracer round. Every 5th round is a tracer round, so when it hit that fuel, it just exploded and just engulfed us. And see what happened? No, I'm just kidding.
And the rest, as they say, is history. Right. We've got some video of the Cobra helicopters in battle that we can show as we talk about this a little bit. And you flew Cobras, correct,
yes,
Jack?
Yes, I did.
So talk about the nature of what it was like to fly them, their maneuverability, what they were designed to do.
Well, the Cobra helicopter was introduced in Vietnam by the United States Army, and the Army gave 6 helicopters, 6 Cobras to start with, to the Marine Corps. I was the 5th trained Cobra pilot in the Marine Corps. What we learned real quick is, you can see it has a slender fuselage where we sit, whereas the other one was built for 4 people sitting next to each other. It was totally designed to be an assault helicopter, and you were always in the mix. You weren't transporting anything, it was always shooting. A day like as a Cobra helicopter pilot, we took it on in the morning, and we would get a reasonable breakfast, but it was like Tom was saying, it's all day. At some point in time, you run out of adrenaline, but you just keep going. And that was one of the things that I found, that my mind would start to let me down long before my body. Oh, I'm tired. You're really not tired. You got half a day left, and you're shooting all day long, and they're shooting at you, and you just keep going and going and going.
Now
go ahead.
What big picture sense did you have of what you guys were doing that day, how it related to, I don't know, an offensive or some bigger campaign plan? Did you guys have briefings that indicated, here's where we fit into this whole mix of things, or was it much more that kind of thing?
Yes. We talked about a breakfast. Every morning, we had missions assigned, and you knew that day what your frequency was, and that was another thing. I talked about smoke. If Tom and I are flying, or we're flying with you, I would never say what frequency to switch. Don't switch button 1, 2, 3, 4. You had a card and I had a card, and I would say, go button blue, and you would look at your card, and button blue had a frequency next to it. Because if I said that freak, the enemy was going to pick it up. So that was your brief. And then there was never a time when I flew helicopters, or even the fast movers up north, that we weren't briefed on what they thought the enemy was going to do in the morning before we left, what big offensive we were, where we were supposed to be, where we were supposed to be fire. Now, that sounds really easy. Here's your homework assignment. Okay, fine. You're in English class. And for all of you out there, you're in English class, and the teacher says, you're going to write an in-class essay. You come back, you go in to take the test, and they lay down a math quiz. And what's my analogy here? It never went or was like the brief. And I am convinced you will never replace the human mind on the battlefield to defend this country. That's where you all come in.
We're going to run some video, Tom, of assault techniques where the Department of Defense narrator is describing what they're explaining to the American public is happening. And I'd like to do a little comparison between description, how accurate it is, versus what you guys were doing in the field. So let's listen to it first, and then we'll talk about it from your first-person perspective.
Assault techniques with helicopters are different from those used by fixed-wing aircraft. Firing is normally broken off about 500 yards from the enemy so that the helicopter does not have to overfly the target. This reduces the vulnerability of the helicopter to ground fire.
Breaking off at 1,500 feet, you don't get the enemy at 1,500 feet. I mean, those gunships that Jack was talking about, the Marine Corps, man, they came in, and I'm sure he hit the top of the treetops pulling out after gun runs.
Oh, yeah. If you didn't get right down there and mix it up, our guys on the ground were going to get hurt. And they were counting on you.
Right.
Get down there. And the other thing we found out, contrary to those tactics, if you tried to come in either a fast mover or a low one at 50 feet or below, or 1,500 feet and above, because small arms fire, that's where you got into trouble. If they heard you coming and you're at 1,000 feet, they would just wait and listen for the sound and just shoot up and let you fly into it. But if you're 50 feet, one, they couldn't hear you a whole lot, or if they heard you, it was too late. And if you're 1,500 feet, most small arms wouldn't quite reach you that quick. You'd be past it before it went through. So 500 feet, 500 meters, that was roll-in altitude.
Yeah. Never had that.
Well, you know, difference between what the training video is showing, what they might want the public to know, and what you guys obviously had to deal with in reality. To give the students an idea about the reality of landing under fire, we've got an excerpt of a group of Army men, probably a platoon, landing under fire so you can see what that's like.
Left guard 6, I'm down on corral. I've got contact with some snipers, over. Everybody get off the middle of this LZ. Everybody move out, get out there. Ward 6, get that mortar set up on the hill. I want fire in 1 minute. Get them moving, make up. Second platoon, 3 o'clock, they're on the other hill. Camino, I want artillery on that hill, and I want it now. Hurry up. Get over there, come on. Okay, that's it. They're bugging out now.
So the white tracers were enemy fire?
Yeah, the ones I saw was always white. I never saw any red ones coming out.
And when people actually landed,
unless it was the Arvins.
Could you hear? I mean, we hear that man fairly well saying, go here, go there, that kind of thing. Was that kind of communication happening in the sense that you were actually able to hear someone on the field give you a command? Or was it stuff that they had already known in advance, land, and you're going to go 50 yards left, or whatever the case may be? Go ahead, Tom.
Well, he's on the ground yelling, yeah. If you're on the ground, there's not a lot of noise except fire, people firing. But in the air, you've got communication in your helmet. So you're in commo. You can ask Jack about that.
Yeah, we talked to the guys with the radio on the ground, but when you got down there right next to where they were having trouble, you could hear them.
Yeah.
I can still remember guys on the ground. Hey, can you wait? We got a guy with a sucking chest wound. Those were always first, because if you didn't get them to the hospital, they were going to die. And then they'd say, "Can you take one more?" And I don't think we ever said no.
Yeah, you always do.
We never said no, but we sure come out of there heavy, many times, limping along, and yeah, you can hear it, and it's chaos. It's chaos. People screaming, people hurting, people shooting, people, and that hasn't changed from the war in World War II to Korea to now, and I went back on active duty for the first Gulf War. It doesn't change.
That's right.
And when you hear that, your pride to help your fellow warrior takes over, and you're going to be there. You're going to be there. And make no mistake about it, when somebody when it was on the ground and they'd say, he's got a leg shot off, can you take him? We'll wait. We'll wait. But sure would appreciate if you'd hurry up.
Really? Could you carry that? Carry that stretcher a little faster?
Jogging and not stopping?
Could you run just a little faster?
And I never had to say that. Those guys were really picking them up and putting them down.
I figured they'd be moving as quick as they possibly could. They wanted to get back out of there fast too. Tom, you were kind enough to send us some images, and one of them is an image of your helicopter after crashing. So we can bring up this picture of your helicopter crash. Give the students a sense of the sensation of that kind of experience, because for you it happened on multiple occasions. Are you aware of going down and what's happening to you and that kind of thing, and surviving that experience?
That was a that was a bad one right there. Actually, it's organized chaos. It's chaos, but it's organized. And when you get shot down, and it depends how you get shot down, really. Are you falling through trees, or are you just crashing into the ground, or whatever? But it happens so fast and it's so surreal, but it's all slow motion. I know that sounds crazy, but if somebody's watching it all happen, they see you hit the trees and tumble and you're crashing down. But if you're the one in the aircraft, it's like you're on Twilight Zone. And you experience that later in life. You actually relive those experiences like that. I know that sounds crazy too, but I can be driving down the highway, and I swear to God, I can almost smell and feel the air and the drop out from underneath you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Those really bring the experiences to life. I want to go to Zach, who's going to ask a question, and we'll begin to transition from the experiences in war to returning home from war. So he's going to give us a little bit of a summary at this point. Go for it, Zach.
What was your favorite part about being in action?
So in terms of thinking about on the positives of being in action, Tom, what comes to mind? What was your favorite part of being in action?
God, truthfully, I mean, at the time, I hate to say it, but getting our confirms, it was the biggest push that the American government had at the time, was telling us they wanted us to get as many confirms as we possibly could, and that's what we did. It was, the objective was to kill the enemy, and our particular job was to go out and hunt them down, and we did that every single day.
Jack?
Well, Zach, I think one of the most pleasurable things about it was when I got, at the end of the day, I had helped a fellow warrior. They had helped me, I had helped them, and I have built some friendships and camaraderie that I have to this day. And you have no idea what that's like, because you're sitting here listening to two combat veterans tell stories. But how many of you, Tom and I have a bond already. And if you know a veteran, this Veterans Day, I would submit to you, if you ask them a question, let them answer it. Don't say, I saw a movie, or I read this in a book. Hear them out. Because we went over as young men and women like you, and we came home different people, never to be the same, good or bad. Hear them out. And if you listen to that veteran tell his story, you will have a bond for the rest of your life. And that, Zach, is, in my opinion, the most pleasurable thing you can have.
It's been a rare and really wonderful opportunity to be able to talk to both of you. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your history, your stories, your expertise, and your service. We thank you for your service, and thank you very much for your time today. I can't thank you enough.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. It's an honor. It's an honor.
For that.